Bienvenue à tous. Merci de votre participation. Pour écouter notre session en français, veuillez cliquer en bas de votre écran sur l'onglet Interprétation et sélectionner le drapeau français.
Hello, bonjour, habari za leo. My name is Jakudu Guya.
My name is Jahan Biku.
My name is Rashik Fatah. I'm the director of Our Future Cities. On behalf of ICLEI Africa, the African Centre for Cities, Our Future Cities and partners, I'm excited to welcome all of you to the Rise Africa 2021 Action Festival.
Rise Africa has been growing as a platform of thinkers, doers and enablers committed to inspiring action for sustainable cities.
Rise Africa is about building active networks across academia, government, private sector, civil society, and the arts.
Our entry point is based not on articulating problems, followed by proposing solutions, but rather on celebrating our cities as places of innovation and culture, while asking what more we can do to make them more sustainable, inclusive, and vibrant.
This festival is hosting 46 sessions from across 16 countries in Africa and the world. Every session aims to share new ideas, showcase ongoing actions, and launch new initiatives by bringing participants together to chart a new route forward.
We hope that the festival program will inspire you to commit to one or more specific actions that you or your organization will take on. As this session closes, you'll be redirected to a survey in which you can articulate these actions. We will follow up on these committed actions throughout the year and offer resources, connections, and support. In this way, we are testing the idea that events can galvanize action, and we hope that you will join us in this effort.
Beyond this session, there are many ways to take part in the festival.
Register for further sessions.
Vote for your favorites in the photo competition.
Watch a variety of inspiring video provocations.
Test your knowledge of African cities from our daily quiz.
And listen and dance to the Rise Africa 2021 playlist.
We hope that you will make all attempts to reach out to new people and build lasting connections.
Before we begin, it is important to note that this session is being recorded and that by participating, you are consenting to be recorded. All recordings will be available on the program page after the festival.
Creative expression is vital for creating new futures for our cities. So we invite you to enter the session in the spirit of creativity and dreaming.
Let our voices ring, soft and strong. A million rainbow tongues pushing our songs through the wind. Let our stories dance out in step with the moon. Let them boom from hamlets in Soweto. Rise through the sprawls of Cairo, straddle the contradictions of Lagos. Let them tell of sweat and fear. Accompanied by djembes, talking drums and all that jazz. And time and again it is to these voices we turn to remind us that we get past the pain, that we have once chiseled out beauty from mountains of self-doubt, and through the dark tunnels of despair, these stories will lead us out. A universe of multiple dreams written into history, written out of poverty, written to the laughter of thunder, written in lightning, written by a million rainbow voices that never stop ringing.
Welcome everyone to our closing session of the Rise Africa Action Festival. We entrust that many of you have been able to participate in the festival throughout the week, and we're looking forward to this session as a somewhat informal moment to reflect on what types of sessions have been run and what some of the outcomes of these sessions have been. And so I'm going to provide a short overview of some of the stats and happenings that have been going on during the week, and then invite my fellow panelists to join in some reflections on the sessions that they have run, and then on the festival overall, before we then welcome comments and thoughts from those who've joined us in the room about how we take the Rise Africa platform forward. We have our ideas and we want to share these with you and invite you to join us in this journey. So if I can share my screen. Oops. So our session is called Celebrating Our Urban Imaginaries, a joint reflection and a commitment to action. To revisit what we thought of in the beginning when we developed Rise Africa as a platform and the Action Festival as an event, was that we wanted to offer a platform for thought leadership and partnering in Africa. We wanted to bring together diverse actors and perspectives and build active networks. We wanted to inspire participants and provoke new thinking. And we wanted to elicit commitments to action and then follow up on these to see how they're going. We just passed 900 registrants this very morning from over 237 cities across the world. And we're quite proud of the diversity of geographic locations in terms of who has joined us. We invited people and organizations to submit proposals to run their own sessions. And we received a wonderful selection of themes and process sessions, and excitedly put together a program of 46 sessions from across 16 different countries, with focuses in 16 different countries and run by many from outside of Africa as well. 43 of these sessions have run, and we're excited to get the feedback from participants as well as the session hosts as to what types of outcomes they'll be taking forward. On who attended, our nice registration form has shared reflections from here, 899 people, half of whom were below 35 years of age, and the other half mostly 46 to 65, with a few above. In terms of gender, we were evenly distributed between female and male, with non-binary and people who preferred not to disclose gender joining as well. The image on types of organizations who have joined us include quite an even distribution, even though I don't have a picture just yet, of academia and civil society, each at about 20%, with about 12% from government, another 14% from business and private sector, and the rest from a number of differently named organizational types. What is quite validating about the themes that people were interested in their registration form is that just transition is the top of the list, with about 380 people saying that this is one of their 3 most important themes. We noticed that climate adaptation and disaster risk is clearly one of the biggest megatrends that's impacting our continent, is listed second, followed by urban food, water, energy, waste systems. And then much of the remainder of these themes reflect on ways in which we are drawing attention to these themes, starting with creative expression and urban narrative, looking at biodiversity and nature-based solutions, spatial planning, circular economy, data, information, smart cities, artificial intelligence, fourth industrial revolution, and so forth. And so again, quite profound to see that the point on the agenda to start with is just transitions, inclusive cities, and people-centered approaches, which have come up as themes in pretty much all of our sessions. We asked people to voice a vision of their city at the beginning, and here is a word cloud made from this: inclusive, sustaining, safe, and many more of the keywords that we've started to associate with sustainable development. We will be diving deeper into the visions that people have shared and connecting them to the actions that people are committing to, are offering, or reflecting upon in the post-festival survey. We'd like to invite everyone to fill in the post-session surveys that were sent to individual sessions, as well as the overall festival survey. And in any of these, you can articulate a specific action that you're already taking on, or that has been inspired specifically from this festival. And we as the Rise Africa team are committing to follow up with you and check in on how it's going and what further resources, ideas, connections you perceive to be needed to take these further. We felt very strongly that creative expression is not an interlude in between important deliberations, but is important in itself for driving change and for creating new visions. And this was framed very nicely in Tuesday's session, and listening to Mwende Frequency Kotwiwa reflect on being an artist is not just a vocation, but it is a calling. It is part of our being, and it's how we interact and drive change in the world. And I think that session did a very good job of legitimizing creative expression as a vital way in which we drive change. So our 5 poets each delivered beautiful poems as openings to every one of our sessions. And in the background of some of the sessions, we had some cartoonists reflecting on the deliberations in the sessions. We had Maya Adams, Khalid Albay, and Bethel Mangena, who have each produced a number of cartoons, which I will share, and we would love your comments on. A photo competition was run in the lead up to the Rise Africa Action Festival, and we've invited all registrants to vote on which are your favorite. So taking a look at the form, we received a number of votes so far, but we'd like to encourage everyone who attended Rise Africa to take a look at these and reflect. We have shortlisted 7 of 46 submissions from Richard Kiruri in Nairobi, Adedotun Ajibade, Orelua Oulabi, Ahewebiona Monica, Daniel Atta, Jose Valverde, and Quiz Era. And these are framed as beautifully as we could do in a Google form for you to look at and reflect upon. And reflect on whether you agree with the themes and the ideas represented as either being visions of the future or being future-facing. And for you to share some reflections on these, as well as identify who you think should be the competition winner and shortlists. We invite you also to comment by the end of today, hopefully, on the cartoon drafts that have been put together by our cartoonists. They are a very different style and reflect some fantastic tensions that were explored across sessions. And 6 of these drafts will be finalized by the cartoonists and will be shared by attendees. So further comments about what resonates with you in these is very welcome. And the link has been shared in our chat. We invited people to share video provocations, short videos about what they thought were important ideas or actions that were going on in the city. And these are shared on our website. Our 5 poets to begin with, followed by about 20 really interesting and provocative ideas that we invite you to engage with. So with that overview of the plethora of interesting happenings going on during the festival, I would like to invite reflections from session hosts as to what the outcomes of their sessions were. And I've asked these to be brief inputs so that we can have further conversation together afterwards. I'd like to invite my colleague Jahan to set the scene for us with a reflection on the photographic dialogue that took place yesterday. And I welcome all session hosts now to turn your videos on so we can see you.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. So yeah, just some key reflections from the photographic dialogue we had yesterday. And I think it was such a rich conversation. And we had quite a number of city officials, city leaders, activists, photographers. We had a diverse range of people in this group. And it was really interesting to hear the deliberations and the discussions around what people have seen in the photographs that we put up on a mural board. And I think one of the things that came out was, you know, how engaging in this alternative forms of knowledge generation and knowledge products can really highlight some very interesting things about our cities, which we can't always see in the scientific data or the very hard data. And I think, you know, one of the key things was like, how do we merge the scientific and the non-scientific to bring about these really interesting ideas and spark thinking and imagination and innovation in the way we approach things and do things. A key thing that came out was around informality in our cities and the fact that we really need to have more of these discussions with across disciplines and with our city officials and get a bit uncomfortable with, you know, what we used to and what how we need to approach this going forward. Do we eradicate informality, or do we look at hybrid models to bring the formal and the informal together? Where are the gaps, and where are the really innovative things that are happening in between these gaps that we need to really bring about? And also, really, people play such a huge role, and that's one of the key reflections that a lot of people saw in these photographs. People as infrastructure, people as shaping their cities, people as making their spaces. And so when we're thinking of designing our cities, how do we create spaces that are evolving, that are not prescriptive, but understand how people need to use their spaces, how they need to use it, and allowing them to be part of that process, and allowing cities to be flexible and evolving and understanding and acknowledging that. And I think the key outcome really is to have more of these conversations around different knowledges or around different ways of bringing this together, and having these conversations around informality a lot more and a lot deeper. So those are just some of the reflections from my session. Thanks.
Thanks, Jahan. I'll invite Willie to join us with a reflection of participatory mapping in Yaoundé.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you in this session. Yes, in our session, it was on participatory mapping of Yaoundé. What is important there to take is that our project was part of a global project called Open Cities Africa in many countries, cities in Africa, more than 15 cities covered by the World Bank. So the Open Cities Africa project aimed to build skill, data and network, and to support disaster risk management in urban planning in many cities in Africa by remote mapping, field mapping, using technology, and so on. So as you all know, what is really important today is when we observe the global challenges, all those issues, it's really important to have innovation, let's say more creativity locally and commitment to sustainable development. So we really need to empower the communities. We need more accountability and transparency in the process. So what was interesting there is that, okay, data is something that is very important. It's key. Data is all today. Data should not be a luxury. So what we did in the Open City project was produce data, but what was more interesting there for us was to think about the next step. How do we use this data to challenge all those issues? So it was really important to connect all those actors from the digital ecosystem. That is why during our project, we created a social network connected to a geo-platform to allow exchange of information around map data to facilitate spatial dialogue of stakeholders around project on a related territory. So the project, we identify many, let's say, user case, we identify their needs, their frustration from the OSM contributor. We want more visibility. We want more opportunity to the GIS technical manager or program manager. They want more transparency, more collaboration, and more, let's say, coordination in their project. Even to the simple citizen, we may be a member of an association or not, we want to be part of the dialogue. We want to report the needs of the citizen to the politician or to the decision maker. We want to participate by acting, using the mobile also. So what was really interesting there is that we really build a platform that is available, the infrastructure is available worldwide. Now we are connecting this social network to this platform to enable spatial dialogue in order to empower all those communities. That is something that was very interesting. So combining several sources of scientific data is very crucial. But what is really interesting there is to involve citizens to transform all those new challenges into opportunities for sustainable development. Thank you.
Thanks, Willie, so much. Can I invite Julia to offer a reflection on learning across African cities, developing new pedagogies?
Thanks. Yeah, so our session was called Learning from Across African Cities, Emancipatory Pedagogies for Transformative Change. And it was co-organized by the Habitat International Coalition and by the Knowledge and Action for Urban Equality program. And what we were reflecting on in the session was the question, what are the learning practices that are activating and enhancing the agency of different urban practitioners? And what key principles and qualities are really those learning practices built upon? So we had 12 contributions from grassroots organizations, from social movements, from higher education institutions, from 8 different countries who shared their experiences of emancipatory learning in fields such as activism, social mobilization, advocacy, and policy change. And perhaps just to give you 2 examples, we had presentations from the International Budget Partnership in Senegal, who are working with the Senegalese Federation of Inhabitants to strengthen budget literacy of its members. We had a presentation from Pamoja Trust in Kenya, who have been kind of deconstructing the road as a kind of given concrete piece of infrastructure, and instead learned about the different engagements of people with infrastructure, which then, brought about strategies to claim their rights to stay and not be evicted in the face of construction process. So what we tried to do was to distill the key qualities across those very rich learning practices, and we also invited the session participants to name what they consider core principles and practices for making learning emancipatory. And I think broadly we came up with 4 categories. So first, that they challenged the who. So fundamentally showing that everyone in the process is a learner, and that it was really notable that none of the speakers used words such as teacher or students, but they really foregrounded how co-learning needs a horizontal encounter and challenges the hierarchies and knowledges that are often, manifested in more mainstream learning processes, I guess. Then secondly, we learned that emancipatory learning practices have a particular where, and that this locus is largely outside of the classroom. So we've heard about tents and roads and houses and neighborhoods who have been really crucial learning environments that kind of grounded reflections and that also stimulated, visions about the future. The third characteristic was that learning practices have not really claimed to be problem solving, but really rather problem posing. So the example that I just gave with the road was really one of, thinking about dialoguing, recognizing that something that is taken for granted is actually something that needs to be negotiated, shaped, developed with and by the learners. And then the fourth is that learning practices all included some process of visioning and provoked an orientation towards the future. So not only addressing the immediate needs, but really transforming the very structural problems and oftentimes changing policies and plans at different scales and over the long term. So what we're going to do next with that is that we will compile the inputs and the drafts and draft a pamphlet or a manifesto on emancipatory pedagogies, which we will then, collectively develop with all the speakers and the interested participants of the sessions. And I also want to leave my email address in the chat in case someone who hasn't been part of the session wants to become part of the process. And the idea of this pamphlet or manifesto is to provide an impetus for different organizations, institutions to spark conversation on, what makes your learning practices emancipatory, or how could they become emancipatory. And we will also use it as an input for what we call core learning spaces, which are cross-regional learning processes on issues related to habitat rights that will be curated by the Habitat International Coalition and by the Knowledge and Action for Urban Equality program over the coming year. So thanks, I'm going to leave it at that.
Thanks so much, Julia. And yeah, we'd be welcome to share emails. We'll be sharing back with all participants of the session as well. Vanessa, do you want to share on building healthy relationships between local government and civil society?
Okay, thanks, Paul, for giving me this opportunity to reflect on the SEMCA session at RISE. So basically the session was about us just having a conversation with different participants from different institutions. I mean, in the room we had NGOs, we had civil society organizations, we had local government, and we really just had a conversation about how we can build healthy relationships between local government and civil society organizations to boost climate action. So we know that resilient climate solutions increasingly need to use the experience, the knowledge, and the energy of the people who are directly affected by climate change as the basis for planning responses. And so in our cities, this requires not only drawing from the insights of the local authorities or drawing from the insights of the national government, but also drawing from the insights of urban residents, especially the poor, and of course, especially from the civil and social movement groups. And the reason to draw these knowledges and these experiences from these groups is that they have demonstrated immense capacity to plan and to implement different climate solutions. And at the same time, they also are critical to successful climate change actions on the ground. And they also inspire hope, they inspire confidence, and they also cultivate sustainable transformation by putting pressure on decision makers for political, for cultural, for technological reforms. But from our session, we've heard that the inclusion of civil society organizations in local planning and decision-making processes is something that is not normal. And one of the reasons that I can think of from this session is that the government may not have the necessary mechanisms, or they might not have the adequate resources to effectively engage with civil society organizations. Or sometimes it's the other way around. The civil society organizations do not have adequate resources to engage with local governments. But from this discussion, I can point out two key points that came out. And one of them is the importance of communication. Really clear communication between the two parties is very critical for outlining the roles and responsibilities to smoothly run projects together, and also to communicate the project priorities, but also for communication of civil society organization priorities for monitoring and evaluation of their own project. So clear communication is one factor that would improve that relationship between the two parties. And another key point was the issue of civil society organizations working in silos within the same region on similar projects. So there's a need for the different CSOs to establish some connections and networks amongst themselves so that they can strengthen their impact and activities. And I remember this point came from both parties, from local government participants as well as the CSOs who were part of the sessions. But Paul, just to wrap up my reflections and maybe share a little bit of how we plan to take these outcomes forward. I'm really excited about this because the session formed part of our project called Scaling Up and Empowering Movements for Climate Change Advocacy, SEMCA. And through this project, we aim to improve effective processes for engagement between local government and civil society organizations by providing co-production, engagement, and capacity building spaces that we hope will enable mutual learning, knowledge transfer, and collaboration to ensure improved civil society engagement in city decision-making processes. We also, with this project, aim to support movement, cross-movement mobilization by trying to establish strong connections between the different climate change community groups or CSOs so that they can strengthen their impact and activities. And this brings me back to the point of CSOs working in silence. So hopefully through this project, we will be able to establish those strong connections between them. So I'm really, really excited that the discussions that came out of the SEMCA session at Rise Africa will inform and will be fed into to similar projects. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, for the reflection. To hand over on partnerships, can Ayanda reflect for us on building partnerships towards shared public space in Joburg?
Thank you very much, Paul. Our session was on partnering to develop shared spaces in Johannesburg. So the session itself was diverse in the sense that even the organizers were coming from different sectors, like university, private sector, and local government. The session overall acknowledged the fact that, or acknowledged the complexity of public spaces in African cities, given the different roles they play for different segments of society, and that COVID highlighted this. And then we moved on how public spaces could be, in future. And we did that by presenting 2 examples that showed how co-creation is so important in creating a new kind of public space that reflects a more socially integrated urban reality. But there was a realization that things as they stand, our current reality in many of our cities does not really enable that. The work that we do in local government, the way that we work, our policies, our systems are not geared towards that kind of complexity or to achieve the outcomes that you want of a more just, inclusive, and sustainable cities. To cite one example is the fact that greater coordination and collaboration is needed, to sort of create public spaces that reflect a more socially integrated urban reality. And that coordination and collaboration within cities, but also between spheres of government, between government and non-state actors. And we observe that at the heart of that is people, is city practitioners, meaning that a new generation of city practitioners is needed. People that understand integrated development thinking in terms of how we construct a joint vision of the spaces where we work, and also with other state institutions and non-state structures, which such as civil society organizations, private sector, universities. So we think that city practitioners need to be equipped to convene and also to curate multi-stakeholder processes that allows inclusive conversations when it comes to public spaces in African cities. Because in one of the presentations, we saw that there are contested spaces. Therefore, we need people who are able to negotiate and mediate on various interests and uses of public spaces to ensure that they are more inclusive. A question was posed, given all these challenges, where do we start? And there was sort of a consensus on the importance of experimenting or piloting or testing some of the ideas. And by doing that, or do that in a manner that is inclusive, that touches or that inclusive and touches different sectors, and different disciplines. And through community-based urban studios, that's one example of co-learning, of working with communities as partners, not just as subjects. So that was one. The second one was around the importance of knowledge exchange between African cities and cities of the global south through case studies and tools and guides. And our last question was around, okay, where do we start? and the Center on African Public Spaces that is being set up by the City of Johannesburg, a pan-African knowledge exchange platform with other African cities, universities, and civil society organizations. So that was seen as the first step in the right direction to do that kind of work, working with other platforms and institutions already working on urban development issues. Platforms such as this one, Rise Africa, and also institutions such as African Center for Cities and the Future of Cities. And when it comes to Global South Connections, platforms like Placemaking International or Placemaking X and other partners like UN Habitat and to contribute to Global North knowledge. So that was it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ayanda. I'd like to invite Nazreen Elamin to reflect on cultural aesthetics and urbanization.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. So our session gave a broad look at how cultural aesthetic through art, architecture, language, and cultural identity can drive inclusive urbanization. We also looked at how the essence of cultural heritage can be infused into modernity in such a way that Africa's cultural values and diversity can be felt, seen, and appreciated within our cities through African architecture, music, food, art, and language. So when exploring cultural identity and architecture in Africa, we identified a gap in promoting and sustaining the idea of integrating African architecture in urban designs and development. So we trace this to lack of general interest in expanding and modernizing African architecture, and lost support or access for local talents or practitioners to execute capital projects. In terms of our discourse on cultural identity, the visual artist E.L. Singh did an exhibition on the evolution of cultural identity, drawing from his Northern African roots. The exhibition featured a mixture of historical, gender, and artistic symbols through sculptures that expresses the impulse of contemporary consumerism. In essence, the exhibition showcased how we, as people who are intrinsically linked to nature, have adopted cultures that have placed immense value on material things, thereby losing our sense of judgment that is good or bad, and that of our cultural identity. But in a way, it was an expression to expand the scope of our perception of what cultural identity is and can be. That is, life experiences continue to shape our perspectives and belief system, thereby changing and evolving our cultural identity. The last bit of the session focused on the implications of urban development to Indigenous peoples and communities. So we had an open discussion on how most often in Nigeria and other countries experiencing rapid urban growth, local people and communities are forced to move to make way for urban cities, which often leads to marginalization and displacement of these people. So the key outcomes from the session were first to incentivize and build interest for African architectural design, to embrace the concept of cultural identity beyond ethnic values, and to view it as an evolving factor. And the last outcome is to promote advocacy for equal rights, access to good healthcare, educational facilities, and sustainable livelihood for local communities whose lands are being used to expand and build our cities. So this is all from me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nazreen. I'd like to invite Nelson to reflect on financing gender-sensitive climate action.
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Paul, for offering this opportunity to speak about the session that took place on Monday, which was entitled Finance for Gender-Relevant Urban Climate Action in African Cities. It was organized under the framework of the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa and the Network of Locally Elected Women of Africa, the REFELA. This session aimed at discussing gender-relevant actions and solutions in order to address the urban climate finance gap in African cities. So we saw the participation of high-level women political leaders, such as the president of the REFELA and the mayor of Nouakchott, capital of Mauritania, who especially reflected on the role of women leaders and how to empower women with regards to the fight against climate change, but also the difficulty to access climate finance for African cities and women, and how difficult it is for cities also to develop proper gender-sensitive climate actions and responses. But also we had the participation of financiers and experts from the Green Climate Fund, the African Development Bank, and the Eastern Africa Alliance on Carbon Markets and Climate Finance. We spoke about the mechanism to integrate like the gender dimension in accessing climate finance, but also some projects they have already in Africa to empower women and target women and climate in Africa. So the main outcome of the session were for the Covenant of Mayors, the initiative Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa to integrate like explicit recommendations on how local governments can incorporate gender mainstreaming into their climate and energy planning through sustainable energy access and climate action plan. Also, another outcome was to develop studies and resources, such as one that will be launched in June on gender and street lighting, which will provide like detail on how to design implementation projects that are gender responsive. And last, also through this session, but hopefully future events, to build like a stronger partnership between the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa and the REFELA to enhance the capacity of women and to amplify the voice of female African leaders on regional and international platforms. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelson, very much. And to hear from the last session that we invited, I wonder if Deborah can share reflections on how to do circular economy in practice and the key outcomes from that session. Please be welcome to turn on your video and sound.
My video, I'm not so sure. Oh, okay. Sorry I was late. I was actually en route. So sorry about that. Let me see if I can turn the video as I speak. I'm nothing, so I had to check somewhere, get into the meeting. Our session was, I guess, part of the last ones we had. Was yesterday in the evening, and we had most of breakout rooms sessions, trying to get people to participate, to discuss more and to talk more to what we were doing. And so I think the session, sorry about the problem. I think the session was interesting. Our participants didn't show up as promised. We had about 300, 137, I think.
Deborah, can you reflect on what the conversation was about more than logistics? We're going to reflect together on the logistics of the festival and definitely want your input on how we can do better.
Okay, so the conversation was about circular economy. Sorry, it was about circular economy, and it was about, we shared practical examples from our report on what entrepreneurs were doing on circular economy in the on the continent. So we used the key elements of circular economy that has been launched by Circle Economy to as a guide to the session, and we spoke mainly to the core, the three core elements from circular economy. And we then went into breakout rooms to discuss, we gave them like case studies, and we let people discuss what the circular economy meant and how they could use the key elements to provide solutions to specific challenges that some entrepreneurs noticed. And then we came back to share the solution that businesses or entrepreneurs in the space were already using. So that was mainly what the session was about. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So I'd like to thank everyone for their brief reflections on the key outcomes of the sessions, and I think there is a lot to take forward. I certainly won't capture all of the themes, but what struck me is the power of boundary objects such as data or photography or art in bringing people together around a central idea or issue. The importance of co-learning, and I think Julia's point that we are all learners, and having that as an ethos for how you create participation and remove these sort of hierarchical barriers. The need, of course, as emphasized by many, for cross-sector engagement, cross-sector coordination as well, and identifying whose role it is to help with that coordination. I particularly liked on needing that future orientation in much of the work that we do. So it's not simply about the here and now, but where we're going together. And then, as Nazreen has sort of hinted, the need for trust building and for building confidence in a lot of the work that is going on. So many more themes, and I'm sure you've all picked up a few. I'd like to invite people who are attending the session to write into the chat any key takeaways that emerged from your session that you participated in, as well as your impressions of some of the ideas of the festival. I see a few chats have come in. Please share it with panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your voice. And I do apologize, the French interpretation unfortunately didn't seem to be set up and we couldn't find a way to get it on, but we will have a recording of this. I realize I've said this in English. Malheureusement, l'interprétation en français ne fonctionne pas. Donc, nous partageons ultérieurement en version française. Merci et désolé. Désolé. With that, please do share in chat your thoughts. I'd like to invite 4 discussants who've been engaged at different parts of the festival and for their reflections on the festival overall. So I'd like to invite Rashik Fatah, who's been our curator, working with the team at ICLEI Africa and his team helping us to ensure that logistics run smoothly, but also having great input into the content. Rashik, if you'd like to provide a reflection on the festival overall.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to the ICLEI Africa team, the African Center for Cities, and to all the session hosts and organizations which gave time and energy and really interactive, interesting presentations and made us all ready once to commit to many, many actions after this particular week. And it's really energized myself and my team in particular. When Paul and the ICLEI team first approached us, I think when we saw the number of sessions, the amazing types of contributions, I did think that Paul was a bit crazy. 46 sessions, Instagram lives, to have people tuning in from the offices, live from different public spaces, and then to bring people from around the world together. So I think that that initially seemed a bit crazy, but we've done it, and it's really amazing to have seen an actual festival come together. From poetry to music to photography and data, as Paul mentioned. So kudos to everyone who believed that a focus and a passion for African cities and towns and spaces deserved a platform like this and deserved a moment of connectivity in a time which has really divided us in ways which we didn't really know. I'm just going to reflect on some of the overriding feelings and themes which after 5 days quite strong. The first is the festival provided a sneak peek and a window into action. So from our homes and offices and desks, we got to see actions taking place, how they took place. I recall the session on Johannesburg's parks. It felt like we were in the park. The designers took us to what they thought, showed us the implementation. We watched street festivals in Lagos. We watched the mapping of Yaoundé in Cameroon. So from the traditional conference where we're in a physical space to this virtual space, we got to travel to see these actions and really open doors and windows and rooftop spaces and skylights. And we got to really, really see a lot of what was taking place in a short period of time. I think we'll realize it in the weeks to come of how much we have seen and engaged with in a really deep level. The enthusiasm and energy was real. And I think this is what makes the continent and the people here who have been part of the festival in different ways really amazing. When we all thought that in the last 2 years our energy was perhaps a bit low, we saw curiosity, we saw yearning for change from not just urbanists and environmental activists. We saw it from those that were committed to projects for a long period of time, those that were asking for new ideas, whether it was from academic projects or infrastructure projects. So it wasn't fake. There was a real enthusiasm, asking for ideas, wanting to take projects to the next step. We saw great connections, and not in the way that we perhaps thought there would be connections. It is very difficult in a virtual space with Zoom and WhatsApp and websites to form real connections, but we saw this in the panel discussions and in the sessions. If I look back on our placemaking session, we found, and perhaps even the next Urban Champions core session, connections were forming during the discussion. Barriers for some became experiences for others, where they had already found ways forward or toolkits of overcoming their challenges. So the connections were not just digital, but they were through discussions, and they were quite live and quite tangible. And we must do a lot more to harass and bug people and push them to continue those and stay in touch. And I know that the great part about Rise Africa is that it's not just a once-off action festival, but it really does continue throughout the year. So there's so much energy around that. We found new urban champions. We found the next urban champions. They were called fixers. They were called mayors in some cases, community mavens. They took on really a whole bunch of different names. And I think it's great that we included the asterisks in the definition of next urban champions, because that definition can now be expanded to the newer groups, the collectives, the outliers that were never really given the title of champion. We always speak about breaking down silos. I think that we create our own boxes, and I think we need to break our own boxes of ourselves and of other groups and people. So silos are, really solid and hard structures, whereas I think we can break through what I call boxes. There are ways to break out. We heard from Nabil Peterson, who said science, art, and politics and business can overlap and converge and find new ways of engagement. So I think we should be very wary of putting ourselves into boxes, putting the arts and creativity, as Paul said, into boxes, and really step out of our comfort zones. And the festival really allowed us to merge our boxes and to open boxes and to tear them apart and reach out to others. A big focus on language and storytelling came through. We found lots of new methods to do this. In a particular session, somebody said we should delete the word placemaking. We heard different podcasts being used as a new way of storytelling to inspire action around climate change, and especially around identity and what an African identity actually is. And then just to conclude, despite the vastly different contexts and spaces in which people work, despite the different fields, disciplines, and sectors, there was a commonality. And I think that common ground is perhaps something to think about taking forward to future editions of Rise Africa. Despite our our different ways of life and languages in many cases as well, the aspirations and goals are similar. We want engaging, accessible, sustainable cities where people have freedom to move, to engage, where they are safe. And I think that's something that has been carried throughout the sessions this week and throughout the festival. Thank you.
Thanks, Rashik. I really like that image of the sneak peek into African cities. And I think all of us have experienced this massive change due to COVID, and the experiment that we've all been on in many other festivals, but this one included, on how to engage meaningfully online, I think is really worth reflecting on more deeply as we move forward, and where it has added value and where it could add more value. This would not have been possible in our initial framing of Rise Africa, where people would come to a single event. And so I, yes, I might have come with a crazy idea to you. You brought plenty of crazy ideas to the mix, but this crazy idea would not even have occurred in a traditional format. Maybe this is an appropriate moment to invite Geshe to reflect, who has been on our advisory board, and a very yes and energy in the way that we've been developing this, and so has seen the journey evolve. And if you could reflect on the evolution, but the festival as well. Welcome.
Thanks, Paul. And really the first thing I want to say is actually thanks to you and the Crazy. Thanks to ICLEI and Rashik and team and everybody who's made this possible. It was amazing to be able to be here today and just hear the host reflections as well. I suspect many people couldn't always be participant to all the sessions one would have liked. And that's always tough with these things, there's like really great content and you wish you could drop absolutely everything else and do all of them. But I guess the other beauty of the virtual format is we know we can come back to it. So that's really wonderful. And I'm sure you'll do a wonderful job of just curating and making sure that we continue to have access to this amazing content. I just went through the cartoons and the photos and encourage those who haven't done so to do that, because they're really amazing. They're really amazing. I have 100 ideas coming out of these photos. And why that's important is that one of the first things Paul invited me to do months ago was to offer one of the provocations building up to this. And my provocation was around the need to unvision and to really think about the future of Africa and of African sustainable cities very differently. And I'm really pleased just in how things have played out this week, the couple of sessions I was able to be part of, what I've heard about other sessions today, is really picking up on that. And I just want to highlight that, I talked about needing to imagine cities differently and to have different ideas about them. And I'm hearing these words coming out. I'm hearing people talking about different knowledges, different ways, co-design and co-producing, different learning practices. I'm hearing about next generation ideas, next generation practitioners, all of these. Even the fact that what you've managed to do, or what we've managed to do, if I can add us all into it, Paul, this week, is to curate not just a variety of audiences, but a variety of voices. And so for me, the mixing as well of perhaps practitioner knowledge with research knowledge, with artists and creatives, with people who are just interested, that's such an important way, because my second provocation often is around process. We've got to just do things differently. So the idea that a couple of clever people can sit in a room, and I saw some great cartoons about this, and just sort of map out the future somehow and draw these perfect plans and do this textbook thing that could define the future. I think that wasn't the spirit of this week. And I really do hope that we are beginning to inspire, if you want, this next generation of practitioners who understands that co-production, co-design, it's not just a word, it's something we can actively do. And it's something that actually enriches society. My last provocation often is around and was around the need to change institutions. And I think that's a big one. Saw some nice cartoons again speaking to some of the concerns people have about the bureaucracies and the big institutions that make it very difficult actually for us to bring change. And I think coming out of this is one of the things we'll have to continue working on. But the first step to that in any case is the ideas and the processes that engage differently. So I'm really inspired to see what's come out of this week, are really quite amazing. What's also been great about this week is often in South Africa, and I assume maybe in other African countries as well, we talk about the need to have this all of society approach and that everybody needs to be involved. We don't do it very well. And I would argue that every corner doesn't do it very well. I think government often doesn't include people very well. I think the civics tend to do the civic thing, and the private sector has their own barroom sessions and whatever, or boardrooms. So let's say barroom. And the thing is, when we talk about SDGs, or we talk about whatever urban policy frameworks people have in your countries, or any kind of sustainability agenda, it really does take all of these corners if you want to do things differently. I'm really excited to see the just cities, inclusive cities, people-centered bit coming out as the top theme from the week, because that is so important. I don't know if people remember or realize that, Africa is hella unequal. South Africa wins, so we're starting the problem from the bottom, but it's really all the way up. 10 out of the 19 most unequal countries in the world are in Africa. I don't know if you all know this. I don't know if you know that actually in terms of inequality of the top 10% to the bottom 50, Africa is the worst. It's really shocking. And so the idea that we are going to create some idea of the future that somehow doesn't engage with that issue about how we not just talk climate change or talk, the fourth industrial revolution, or talk whatever in ways that ignore the extent of inequality, and that we've got to think about change in a very different, a very inclusive way, I think is really important. And I think the last point I wanted to highlight is that underpinning the provocations I began with, and I'm really seeing that come out of the week, was this need to test some of the assumptions we hold, some of the limits of doing that we often place around ourselves that really prevent the possibility of anything different. I loved the photos for this reason, because there's a beautiful blend of impossible with what is, with what people are thinking is interesting. I think that's really cool. And I'd really like to encourage us to do much more of that. We need to blend different ways of knowing. We really need to address and get past these limits. We talk about whether it's boxes or the, or hierarchies that really prevent other possibilities and diverse possibilities. This, we don't want to have the average African city. We want to be able to have conversations like this and hear about Yaoundé and hear about Kigali and hear about Bamako, wherever, in ways that are rich and specific. So thank you so much for an amazing week. Thank you for the crazy ideas that led to this. I'm really excited that this isn't just an event, but I think a mainstay going forward. And I really look forward to being part of that poll. Thank you.
Thanks, Keshi, very much for the reflections. I'm loving that crazy has become a theme here, as exploring new ways and experimenting. I don't know if Edgar, who started our journey as well on Monday, but unfortunately couldn't join us today, would count himself as a crazy, but I'd like to share his reflection that he messaged me before we jump to someone else who definitely adds layers to our experimentation. So Edgar says, here are my 2 cents. It is clear that we will need to build city-level platforms where urban activists, researchers, experimenters, storytellers, and policymakers can interact on a sustained basis to support each other and experiments with radical innovation in all domains of urban life. Urban research capacity located in African universities should embed themselves in such city-level platforms. These city-level platforms should be connected through a pan-African platform that can aggregate the best of the best learning and innovation. This is the ideal role for RISE Africa in the future. While city-level platforms are being developed, RISE Africa can explore the identification of a first cohort of city-level platforms that it wants to support and amplify, and through that engagement, design the next RISE Africa Festival. Furthermore, the specialist work of existing Pan-African networks in domains such as circular economy, digital rights, peace building, and so forth can be encouraged to explore how best they want to insert their practice and questions into the next festival. And I think that's a really interesting point of how there are many existing groups who we haven't pretended or wanted in any way to displace. This has always been an inviting space. And so adding to that momentum, and they've all brought their momentum together. I shall paste Edgar's point into the chat in a moment, Nyenka. So Eddie brought plenty of experimentation as well, and is a phenomenal facilitator and process thinker. And I'd like to invite Eddie to reflect on the experience of the festival, and it's through Red Cross Climate Center that we had the benefit of our cartoonists in the background as well. And that idea as an important way to digest the festival is really appreciated. Eddie.
Asante, and thank you very much. Webale, and also Saubona. I'll never forget that particular one, because every time I flew to Cape Town, I looked forward to just that moment where the lady on the screen said Saubona. Well, yes, I am Eddie Jemba, working for the Red Cross Climate Center, and well, I was so glad to be part of this, and I continue to be glad to be part of this engagement. Now, coming towards the end, there are two. There is an advantage that there is nothing much to say, but there is a disadvantage. There is almost nothing much to say, but there is an advantage that you can pick up from the previous speakers. Well, let me share now the reflection from the facilitating aspect. I think I want to say that what I experienced in the Rise Africa Festival can be summed in a word in my local language called katogo, which also is a mix of when it's food, but where you can throw in everything as much as your imagination can allow. This was katogo of different ways of curating. Now that is another word that was quite common. Sessions in here in the Rise Africa, where you get to hear some stories, where you get to see people presenting, where you get to find people enjoying some karaoke. Jehan can testify to that, karaoke. So I think it was good to diversify the way of delivering information, of sharing experience within the Rise Africa, to reflect the diversity in cities, to reflect the diversity in Africa. Don't forget that some people think that Africa is not as diverse, but it's what I forget the English word, but yes, it reflected the diversity. I specifically liked the emphasis on art. I love art. I can hardly do anything that is artistic, but I try, because art is art, imagination. So I liked the emphasis on think out of the box. I remember when I was submitting my sessions, but even when we were brainstorming, we kept on emphasizing thinking out of the box, and I witnessed thinking out of the box in the presentation and even in the content itself. So I think the spirit of diversity was reflected even in the facilitation, and I think that should continue. Remember, there is a lot of Zoom fatigueness. So to overcome the Zoom fatigueness, you definitely have to tap into creativity. I loved the emphasis on art and creativity because, it helps us to illuminate, shed some light on the invisible aspects of our urbanizing Africa, and it can also pave way to the corridors of power, as we witnessed in one of the sessions, where the artists were approached by the vice president, just because of that connection. So art opened room to the corridors of power. And once the, say, vulnerable people, I don't want to use that word, but the underprivileged are able to access corridors of power, then that means their voice is likely to be heard. And at the Red Cross, Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, we like that let's bring the people who are less privileged to the table, and so they should be able to add their voice in how you shape the city, in how you distribute resources, but even in how, for example, you conduct risk assessment and for who and so that they can benefit from that. I loved the emphasis on art. I think that if you can take away something from me, art and creativity. Again, as we're going through this, I thought about my grandmother, and I never stopped talking about her. I love her so much. So my grandmother, if you called her to a meeting to talk about, I don't know, development, climate change, as a climate change advocate, I think she would hardly say anything. But if you told her to tell a story about how the past was, she would take hours. So embracing art and creativity within Rise Africa, I think, can even bring my grandmother into this space, and she's able to share her experience as opposed. And I have a large inclination to science by training, but if we started to talk about photosynthesis, for example, my grandmother would shut out immediately, and therefore we would not be able to to tap into her capacity, into her lived experience as a person who has seen generations. So I want to end by saying that let us keep the katogo and the mix, bringing the scientist, bringing the artist, bringing the rich, bringing the not so rich, bringing the humanitarian workers, and bringing the city focused people all together. I think that came through this particular Rise Africa, and I hope it can continue going forward. Bringing the technology enthusiast, artificial intelligence. I hardly hear about that word, but guess what? I found it here. And by the way, while there is a downside on not meeting people face to face, there are also several benefits that came with it. And I think we can continue to embrace this. I was saved hours of travel. I was saved hours of waiting for my visa. And I was saved a lot. So thank you very much, ICLEI, and all the other partners who put this together. I am so grateful. And also, thank you very much for our cartoon artists. You did an amazing job. As I went through the cartoons, I kept on laughing and laughing, and by also learning and seeing these things that could not be easily seen through a PowerPoint. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you so much, Eddie. We had framed today as talking about what happened in the festival and charting a route forward together. And I'm reflecting that we should stay in this moment a bit longer. Because often what happens at the end of an event is we clap our hands and say, okay, what do we have to do next? And I think it would be wonderful for all of us to stay in the spirit of this festival for another while and digest with more depth what we have learned here and share this further. I will say in a few sentences that what a number of people have alluded to is that Rise Africa is a platform. It became such last year when we pivoted to not have a physical event, which does a monthly intervention around a different topic. And in this way is touching on so many different types of elements of the African urban experience that it has somehow turned into a space in which many people are able to connect across topics and across geographies. So that will continue. Certainly we know of some upcoming themes. This year is a very important year for food, very important for ecosystem restoration. We've just begun that decade. This decade is very important for achieving the SDGs. So there'll be lots of reflection upon that on a monthly theme. And we do invite you to share with us what you think what themes you think would be valuable. We also asked everyone who registered if they would be keen on matchmaking, and we're digesting how to do this in a way that is fun, engaging, not onerous, and does invite people in so that we can connect, as that is one of the most difficult things to do online and requires time and coffee breaks. So I'll pause there. There are many other things that we're thinking about, but let's stay in this moment a little longer. And I would like to invite any of the attendees to raise a hand if you would like to add a 30-second reflection on what the festival has meant, what has it inspired you in certain ways. And I'll open that for another 10 minutes before we close off. And I hand over to the grand enabler of this endeavor to close us off properly. So I'll give a pause for anyone to write into the chat any further thoughts, or to raise your hand, and we'll allow you to use the microphone to share with us. Seeing no hands and seeing no further chats, I would like to invite the person who has been the stalwart enabler of our craziness and of our experimentation, and who has really been, in addition to Geshe's approach, a yes and person. We want to try it? Yes, let's go for it. Yes, let's go for it. And I think that is something very inspiring when you're trying to grow something, is to be supported with many people's enthusiasm. And so Kobe Brunt, who's head of the of ICLEI Africa and Deputy Secretary General of ICLEI, has been that enabler for us. And certainly Rise Africa emerged as a brainchild of hers. And she has let us at ICLEI run with it, let partners make it their own, and invited it in as a platform. So the closing reflection goes to Kobe, as well as to close off the webinar.
Thank you so much, Paul, and to each and every person here today and who've gone on this journey with us through this last week. What a wonderful week it's been, and how much work has gone into preparing for this week as well. So my recognition very much is twofold. On the one hand, to the team, and here I count people like Eddie, people like Geshe, our advisory committee, Edgar, Rashik, you and your entire team, in as part of our team, because we became almost like a family that worked very hard. Paul, fantastic, calm leadership from your side, but also amazing contributions from each and every person in the ICLEI Africa office. There's about 70 of us, and I think in one way or another, each one was involved, but a group of, say, about 20 of that group of 70 were very deeply involved over many months, working on this, right from working on the partnerships with the African Center, African City Center, but also the National Research Foundation, who made a lot of this possible for us and with us, and then also our core partners, bringing Rashik on board. Rashik, I can't imagine that we will ever do Rise, a festival like this, without you. Thank you so much for all the wisdom, insights, technical skills, and know-how that you brought to the table. But Paul, I think, you're probably just going to sleep this weekend. Well, hopefully have a glass of champagne and then sleep. But I want to say the way that you've embraced Rise Africa, you're right, it was a brainchild that was still born before we moved to our nice new offices. We were still sitting in our old boardroom, and we came up with the name, the concept, and the how. Well, not the how, the why. And the how eluded us for a while, but we knew that working in the space of cities and working with cities on a daily basis, that's both the political leaders, the technical leaders, and the people who live in the cities of Africa. We have gotten a strong sense that there's a need for us to celebrate and to imagine together what the future African urban world could be like, and that it should fundamentally come from an African perspective. And because of who we are demographically on this continent, it should be a whole Pan-African, taking it together a process. And especially looking demographically, also we need a very strong voice here of the youth and of women. And also the bringing, as Geshe mentioned, the issues of equitability, of dignity, of accessibility, of transparency, of good governance, all those issues to the fore. And some of these problems are difficult to talk about. Some of these problems are not easy. But here, I think our organization, ICLEI, prides ourselves in the fact that we listen to our cities, and that means everybody who live in our cities. We work for and we serve cities first and foremost. So yes, there's an urban lens through which we look at things, but we understand that cities are inherently dependent on everything what happens outside of these cities as well. If you take a city like Lagos, for instance, millions and millions of people migrate to the rural areas surrounding Lagos every weekend. Can you imagine the chief water engineer of Lagos State, how he or she manages wastewater and the water flow systems in Lagos every weekend? It's a nightmare, because suddenly your demand goes down rapidly and it goes up again on a Sunday afternoon and Monday morning, and Thursday night it goes down again. You know, your normal infrastructure systems aren't designed for that sort of reality that we have here in Africa. We take a lot of the technology from our partners and friends in the north and our more developed cities in the world. But a lot of what we need to do, if we imagine the future African city, is to embrace what is true to us here in Africa and what we hold dear. And one of the things I hold very dear that was also coming to the fore here is the fact that we are still so rural, the fact that we are still so connected to nature. We know where, if we eat chicken that night, we know where that chicken comes from. We know where eggs come from. Unlike many people that I feel are deprived from that very essential connection with Mother Earth and nature, who live in very advanced cities, we here are deeply connected to the soil, to the earth, and to what comes from it, and to nature and what it gives us and how we look after it in return. And we should not lose that when we build cities, because whatever problems come our way, however deep our divided between the haves and the have-nots, how big those divisions are in our cities, if we lose our connection with nature, if we let nature down the path that it is on now, such a destructive path, and we build cities without regarding the natural habitat, we will not have a life for our future generations. Already we're using 1.6 Earths in terms of resources around the world. And Africa still has a lot of fantastic nature intact inside our cities and around our cities. And I want to make a strong call for nature, but not only for nature, also for the connection between people and nature, and that makes us whole. It was only during the pandemic that we really realized how deeply we miss nature. When we were locked up and we couldn't go outside, we couldn't touch and feel and smell nature around us. And this is something unique to Africa, but there are many other African things that are unique to Africa. Our past, our wonderful past kingdoms, our wonderful past cities, where we in fact had running water thousands and thousands of years ago to households. We can do it again, and we can go back into our history to find our future. I think that is very strong, and it's wonderful that that came through. The focus on art, you know, we are art. We express ourselves through art. We say with art that we cannot say in boardrooms. We say it in so many different ways. And Rise Africa just broke open those doors and let the artists in. And I would say that that must be a defining feature of Rise Africa as we go forward. I love the name Rise Africa. It is time that Africa rises. And we've seen it, and we have seen people already rising, people already doing the most amazing things in our African cities. And we've created this platform. It's only the beginning. Paul, I'm afraid you've started something that we should not stop. And no, don't pull that beanie over your head. We're going to do it together. We're going to do it with wonderful partners like Rashik, Eddie, so many others, Edgar, Geshi. We have such strong commitment from so many of the people that we're here. I'm so glad that we could do it in multiple languages. I'm hoping that we can bring more different and diverse cultures into the conversation. And I'm so looking forward to Rise Africa, the festival in 2022. But let me tell you, this is not, somebody has asked in the chat box, what now? Well, what now is that Rise Africa is alive and well and kicking ass, I would say. Maybe you should edit that out if you're recording this, but I would say that from now on until we have our festival again, you're going to hear and see a lot of Rise in social media on the Rise Africa platform. We're going to have provocations. We're going to have wonderful thought pieces, reflections, and we're going to actually also summarize after we've reflected ourselves a bit on what came out of it. We're going to share that in the Rise Africa updates, newsletters, and let's build the Rise Africa community. This is only the start. We've had a wonderful 900 participants here this week. Let's make it 9,000. Let's make it 90,000. Let's make it 1 million people that are rising in cities across Africa together, taking hands, the young, the women, the marginalized, the people in informal settlements, the most powerful mayors and governors, and our national leaders together. We need a whole of society and whole of government approach. So the next target, wonderful, from Rashik, 9,000 participants. Let's go for that, Rashik. We've got 12 months to achieve that. And I think let's build that community. If each of us bring one more, it's already 1,800. And then one more. You know, I mean, there's a lot of wonderful acronyms in Africa about how we build a community, and we've started a community here that doesn't want to stop. They want to continue on this journey. And what ICLEI Africa wants to do is not to determine the journey. We do not want to determine the agenda. We want this 9,000 people. We want these people to decide what should be the priority, what should be the formats. How do we celebrate once a year around Africa Day? Let's this become the city's Africa Day festival for Africa into the future, with the African Union with us next time. And but let's also open it up for the young, the old, the marginalized, the rich and the poor, everybody who live an urban life in Africa, and everybody who travels to an urban center to work daily and commute. And let's celebrate in dignity those people who are working very hard to make a livelihood in Africa. And for me, I think the only thing I can ask is let's remember dignity, our history, our proud history as a continent, and let's also look into the future with hope and with very practical steps of action that can improve the lives of the people who live in our cities. The gogos who stand up at 4 o'clock in the morning, bake a bread, feed the young children, and then walk and commute for hours sometimes to go to a job, and then return when it's dark already, feed the children, look after a small household. Those are the people whose lives we want to improve, and we want to give the young generation hope that they stay here in Africa, that they build our cities to be the greatest cities on this planet for all, inclusive, safe, transparent, with good, clean governance. And I think we're on a fantastic road to achieve that. So a great feeling and sense of gratitude from me, and especially to our teams that made it possible. Paul, you are the hero of the day, but alongside you stand Jahan, Solo, so many others, Jukudu, so many others. I can keep on running all the names of our office, but Eddie and Rashik and others stand there alongside with you. You can stand tall and proud today. Thank you very much to everybody who joined Rise Africa. Look out for next month and the month thereafter and the month thereafter. There's going to be monthly activations for Rise Africa, and we're going on to a journey. We are soon entering the Africa Food Festival month. We are soon entering the African Mobility month. We are soon entering many other exciting initiatives under Rise Africa. The journey continues, and that artwork, that little paved artwork of our journey, Paul, that took us from where we started with Rise Africa in 2020 and where we are now. We will continue filling in that journey as we walk this road together. Thank you to all fellow Africans and to everybody else from outside of Africa who also joined us. You are most welcome. We need your voices, we need your passion, we need your love for our continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Stay well, stay safe. Bye.